we're looking at the idea of certain control positions which form a bridge between the basic position, side control, and ultimately what we want to do is submit your opponent. We're putting this intermediary step where we get increasing amounts of control over our opponent, mostly using our legs against our opponent's head and arms, and that's going to set up the submission holds that we ultimately want to enact. We looked at seated head and arm, which happens to be my favorite way of transitioning from a side pin into the various submission series that I favor. Close second behind seated head and arm is a dorsal pin. The idea is that when someone is flat on their back and their elbows are pressed in close to their side, very hard to hit submission holds on them, very hard. But if I can turn them onto one side, we start to get back exposure on one side. That's obviously going to be something we can attack. We can pull their elbow out and away from their body and create weaknesses and exposures, which are going to set up a lot of submission holds. Okay, so everything begins with the use of an underhook. We're here in front of our training partner, and however we've managed to do it. I'll demonstrate out of one of our favorite ways of working, which is to take our hand inside and take a 10-finger grip, and as a result we can slide past, put our head down and pommel into an underhook type situation. From the underhook we go through and put pressure over our training partner like so. As a result, we can start coming up. I stuff my training partner's head. I bring it inwards, sweeping in with my left knee so that I can use my other knee to point my opponent's head down at the floor, and then we end up in this critical position. The head is trapped between my knees, so your legs are controlling his head. Then from here, I pull his elbow up, lock, and now we have one of our favorite attacking positions. You have a figure 4 grip on your training partner's hands like so. Now what I want to do is separate his hands and put his hand behind his back. Okay. One good way for us to do this is to bring the hands up to put stress on his grip, and then move it in what appears to be the wrong direction to misdirect. And then from here, I snap it back in the opposite direction, and as a result, we have the hand in place. Now, my first thing is to put it behind his back. Why? Because I don't want him to reconnect his hands. That's no good. But if I put it behind his back when he goes to reconnect his hands, there's just no way. Not only does it prevent reconnection, it enables us to put our chest in front of our training partner and create a situation where we can start driving down to the mat. Now, what I don't want to do is apply Kimura without head control, because he can sit up on me. Okay? So from this position, we want to make sure we get head control by stepping over our training partner's head and planting the foot on the other side and going into a sprawl where my body starts to straighten out. When he tries to bring his head up now, it runs right into my leg. Now we're in the perfect position to sweep our elbow down and take our opponent's hand out and away. We're always looking to take his hand in the direction that my left elbow is pointing. What I don't want to do is bring him back and try to force the hand towards the back of the neck. Okay? Rather, my left elbow is pointing out. That's the direction I want to take his hand. Okay? So let's have a look at all of that from the start again. Pascio's got a good, strong defensive position. We've got a good side pin. First thing we're going to do is put his arm into a position of vulnerability. So from here, I start by feeding my hand between his wrist and his bicep. So I can go through and lock the 10-finger grip. That's going to enable me to take his hand out and away and get my head down to my own hands. Now when I punch through, I get that underhook that I seek. From here, we bring everything up. I take my elbow down to his sternum. I connect my ear to his hip, and I come up into that classic sprawling position. Now from here, I stuff my training partner's head. I carry it to the inside and bring my second knee around like so. And as a result, I can turn his head down towards the floor and get excellent control. If he comes up to his knees, it's the easiest thing to use this bar across his back to continually tilt him back down to the mat until we can connect, feed the second hand through, and then lock the figure of 4 around our training partner's arm. I bring the hand up as best I can, misdirect, and then from here, separate the hands, put it behind the back so when he tries to reconnect the hands, it's not going to happen. Now I put the body weight in front, pivot over my training partner, and drive down towards the mat. Once we get them flattened out in this position, our whole thing is to bring our leg over our training partner's head. Once there, we bring our body weight well forward and sprawl and arch. I don't want my body rounded over his body. I want a good, confident arch in my back. As he tries to work his way out, very, very difficult. I point my elbow, and then I take his hand in the direction that his hand is pointing. We'll just demonstrate that from a different angle. Plus, we'll have our head to the camera, feet down this way. So, starting off, basic position, side control. Feed the hand through, separate, head down, underhook in place. Control our training partner, sweep the head out to the side. Control our training partner with our two knees around his head, just like so. He tries to come up, the bar around his shoulders makes for easy mat returns. I draw the arm, lock through, hands in place. Misdirect, separate, hand behind the back, get everything in front, my elbow behind his back, and planting him. From this position, driving forward, big step, covers his head, arching our body into a strong position. Never hunched over his body like so. Now, I point my elbow, and I just give that lifting action. Please understand, guys, the idea is not to push his hand. Rather, the idea is to pull his elbow. Okay? So we're not trying to push the Kimura. Rather, we hold everything still and we pull with our elbow. Like pull, and it's done. Okay? One more time from a slightly different angle. Now, from that situation, we'll have drawn our training partner up on the side. We stuff the head, this in like so, and our first action from here is to pin his head between our knees. We lock, control, separate. From here, there's the initial position. I step over his head and control his head. We go into a full sprawl, everything locked up. Body weight forward, he tries to turn left and right. Finds it very difficult. Elbow pulls, and it's done. Now, you will notice, guys, that my body is almost north-south on my opponent when I complete the Kimura. Okay? My hips dominate my opponent's right shoulder. My hips dominate the right shoulder, and my shoulders dominate the left hip. So there is a line that goes from Placido's right shoulder to his left hip. That is the power line. I don't want my body to be straight across side here. Very little power in this direction. Rather, I want to walk almost quasi-north-south out here. And it's from this north-south position that I cover the head and I drive here, so that my shoulders cover his left hip and my hips cover his right shoulder. That's the power line that I want to work from. That maximizes my base of support. So when he turns left and right, I'm stable. Okay? He tries to turn into me. He will only expose his hand further. He tries to turn away from me. My left foot makes it exceptionally difficult. And as a result, we get very, very strong, powerful Kimuras. Okay? So that's always the angle we want to work with. Now, that's the basic method. Let's look at a more advanced element, which is necessary when you have stronger opponents who do a good job of locking their hands defensively. So, we've got an opponent down, legs towards the camera. We've done a good job of going through on our training partner and getting to our various grips. We've stuffed the head. Swivel your feet this way, buddy. Now, I've done a good job of bringing his head around the corner, but this time, instead of just controlling the head by itself, okay, hands together, I'm going to take my knee and I'm going to put it over my training partner's bicep, right here. So that when I come down to the mat, I'm pinning the lower arm. As a result, when I take the Kimura, it'll have a different position. Previously, the hand was here. Now, I put my knee down on the floor. Don't have your knee off the mat. Put your knee on the floor, okay? I use the fact that his hand can't move, it's pinned, to take his hands away. Grip tight, buddy.
Oh, my bicep. Oh, okay, that's good.
He locks up strong, strong, strong.
Yep.
Okay. From here, I just use my legs to separate his hands. And then I put his hand behind his back. Just like before, we pommel through. Only now, the arm will be trapped as well as the head. From this position, we go into our breaks. Okay? This is an even better method because now the head and the arm are trapped. Okay? So once again, arms in. From here, starting position. I trap the head, and then I put my knee and shin over his bicep. So now we're controlling not only the head, but the lower arm as well. As a result, I can break the hands apart more efficiently. I put the hand behind the back, and I move around into the perfect attacking position. And from here, very strong breaks. Okay. Third option now. We lock up, arms in. So we lock up on our training partner. When I put my knee in place, I go to separate my training partner's hands. And from this position, previously, we went through and we ended up here. Very fine attacking position. Okay. Now, a more advanced way of doing things. Starting off, we get underhook on our training partner. We capture our training partner's head. I put my knee inside, and right from the start, I start the action of raking my foot over his hand. Try to prevent my foot from stepping over. It's a very difficult thing to prevent this. The turn of my legs beats his hand. And as a result, I can walk my leg through so that we capture his arm underneath our leg. When he goes to lock his hands defensively, it's very, very hard for him to hold on. And very easy for us now to go through and into that same winning position that we saw earlier. So, the third and most sophisticated way of doing things, we start with an underhook. From here, we draw the man up. I stuff the head. From here, my knee goes over the top. Even if his hands are close together, you can always get your knee inside. Now, we start that action of kicking through and palming our leg over the top. So that as I knee slide forward and turn back, I capture the head and the arm together. Even if he did lock his hands defensively here, it would mean nothing. Then we lock the hand behind the back, sit through, step over, go into a full sprawl, and then from this position, we're ready to break. So this is the classic method of using Kimura out of this dorsal position. We've seen 3 ways to control the head. 1 is to capture his head between our knees. It's a good method. Does a good enough job in most cases. 2nd is to pin our opponent's arm down with our shin. This is even better because it controls the head and the arm. The 3rd is to pommel our leg so that we trap our opponent's arm between our hamstring and our calf muscle, which functions in a way rather similar to a triangle. And later on we'll see that's exactly what it does set up. And this forms the most sophisticated form of head control out of Kimura. All three methods are highly effective. You can use them very, very easily out of these dorsal pins and create devastating Kimura pressure. We just looked at Kimura as it is applied with the arms or the hands. That's certainly the traditional way of doing things and is very, very effective in almost all circumstances. There will be some occasions that you find it difficult to get your opponent's hands from in front to behind his back. The general watchword is, if you can get the hands behind the back on Kimura, you're pretty much always going to finish. However, if you can't get the hands behind the back, Kimura can degenerate into a strong man's move. You'll often hear people criticize Kimura and say, oh, it's a move that only works for people that are very, very strong. Like most cliches, it's mostly wrong, but has some truth behind it. What they mean when they say this is that if you can't get your opponent's hands behind the back, then it becomes a situation, if you
Dorsal?
Head here, feet here, facing the camera with the chest. Other way. Feet here, head here.
I'm degenerating.
From the situation, we're in here. If the hands are in front, it can be a tricky thing for me to unlock hands and get them behind his back. If I get them behind his back, if I get them behind the back, then from here it's pretty much done. Okay? But when we have situations like this, and you cannot get the hands behind the back, it becomes a battle of my two hands versus his two hands. I have 2-on-1, he has 1-on-1. And if I'm not physically stronger than him, it can be a really tough thing to separate under those circumstances. And so you'll hear people criticize Kimura and say, oh, it's just his hands versus your hands. And only the stronger man wins this. Okay? So yeah, there is some logic to it. Please understand, guys, that if you ever do strip them and you get 2-on-1 with the hand behind the back, the hands behind the back are massively weaker than hands in front, and here you have a tremendous mechanical advantage over your opponent. But as long as the hands are in front of his chest or inside his thigh, it can be a difficult thing under these circumstances to separate. So when this goes on, the general recommendation we should always work with is that if I cannot get the hands behind his back for whatever reason, I should not use my hands to fight my opponent's hand. It's going to become a strength move of my hand strength versus his hand strength. Under these circumstances, I should use my legs against his hands because that's not equal. I don't care how strong this guy is. His hands are not as strong as my legs. Okay? So what I want to do under these circumstances is change my Kimura and then punch my hand through so that I can put my hand on my training partner's mid-back, just like so. And this will leave me some exposure of my training partner's wrist. Okay? So let's come this way. So from a Kimura position, we have his hands in front. We have the basic Kimura situation, and we cannot get the hands behind the back. I'm going to take the standard Kimura grip, and I'm going to modify it. This is my own personal modification for the move we're about to look at. I don't like, most people teach this just with a standard figure 4 lock. What I do differently is I slide my hand through and I put my hand on the back, just like so. Now from here, I'm going to take my leg and step over my training partner's wrist. And then grab a hold of our own thigh. Now, what I want to do is walk his hips down towards the mat and flatten him out. Now, this is a decent position to attack from, but it's not good enough. What I need to do is take my tailbone to his hip. Right now, my tailbone is on his belly button. I need to move my tailbone to his hip. So I'm going to shift my whole body around the corner. This creates a situation where my legs easily separate his locked hands. And then from here, I just push forward with my leg to create an enormously strong break. Okay? So, the general watchword is, if you can ever get your opponent's hands behind his back, hands Kimura, your hands versus his, works very, very well. But if you can't get the hands behind the back and they're locked in front, It's usually better to fight his hands with your legs, because your legs will always be stronger than his hands. And the best way for us to do this is a Kimura with the legs. Often referred to these days after a talented young fellow from Scandinavia called Tariq. Tariq applied, they often call it. I always call it a legs Kimura. It's just Kimura applied with the legs. So, in situations where I control my training partner, I lock up a conventional figure of 4. The way I do things a little differently is I put my hand on his back muscle and grab here. So if Placido went to pull his arm out,
I can't.
it's impossible. What this does is it creates exposure of the wrist. If I have the classic Kimura and I step over, my leg tends to get trapped into my own hands. So the way I modify things is I go in here. That provides plenty of space for me to put my hamstring right over his hands. Now I take this hand out, I grab my own thigh, and I use this hand for balance. I walk over and flatten him out. Now this is a good holding position, but it's not a good breaking position. To break him, I step 1, and then I reposition my hips, shifting my hips so that my tailbone sits onto my training partner's hip. So that now even a millimeter of movement will break his arm. Okay? Just stay where you are, buddy. You can relax your arm. So when you first step over, you're going to be sitting on his belly button. That's a good place to hold people, not a good place to break people. So what I have to do is walk my foot in and literally shift my tailbone to sit here. I should be facing this way. And then this leg does a leg press to push his arm in place. It's not really a linear leg press, as a curving leg press towards the head. And that's what creates enormously strong breaking pressure. So, from a situation where we've gotten the dorsal pin position and we've locked up over our training partner, from here, I bring the hand up and I switch from the conventional Kimura into the modified grip that I favor to set this move up. He tries to pull his arm free, almost impossible. This creates a good position for us to raise our knee off the floor. Don't try to step right from here, you're going to feel very clumsy. Take your knee off the floor so you can slingshot your leg straight over. Grab your own thigh and start walking, using your hand for balance to walk him flat. Now the all-important pivot. Foot comes in, body comes forward, and pivot onto his hip. So as you lean back and push forward, you get phenomenally strong breaks. Let's take the whole thing from the beginning, showing how this would go all the way from a basic side control all the way through to completion. So, we're across side on a tough and talented opponent who's doing a good job of keeping his arms in, making things tough for us. So, we punch in, we get to the underhook, we get up into that sprawl position, we capture our training partner's head and go into one of our favorite positions like so. Placido tries to get up to his knees and finds that he can easily do a turn back down. From here, we go through, lock up, switch our grips, pivot, knee comes up off the floor, big step, locks him in place, walking across his body. Now the critical pivot. I move my body all the way around the corner, and then we push in that gentle curve, and we get the break. And that is how we use our legs to create enormously strong Kimura attacks. Now we're working our way through the various submission holds out of side control. The idea is that we're trying to break them down into series based around control grips. So we looked at seated head and arm first, that's our favorite. Now we're looking at a dorsal pin where we use our legs to control our opponent's head or head and arm and go into various submissions from there. We've been looking at Kimura, that's certainly one of the very best attacking options. Now let's start going into strangleholds linked with Kimura. in particular, Yoko Sankaku, or the side triangle. This is a fantastic way of controlling people into strangulations and also controlling them into joint lock. So it has a kind of a dual function. It's a move which is used a lot in judo, but surprisingly, it's not used very much in jiu-jitsu, which is a sad thing because it's actually a very good form of lock. So let's have a look at it right now. We're here working with our training partner.
Bottom side or
Bottom side. First things first, we've got to get to the position that we favor, the dorsal pin. We've looked at one of the best ways for us to do so is to start with an underhook. Bunch of ways we can do that, but the one we're mostly concerned with is the one we use most of the time, is to punch through our training partner's wrist, get to a 10-finger grip, and then from here, start working our way down into situations where I can draw our training partner's head up. Now, from here, we start with head control, like so, controlling the man's head. Then for this particular one, I'm going to put my knee over my training partner's bicep. As a result, I can pommel my legs through. From this position, I bring my knee into my training partner's armpit and sweep back. And as a result, we can quickly lock over our training partner like so. Now, from this position, presumably he's going to be locked up defensively here. We've locked up defensively. From this position, we're going to take our body and come down to the mat. I'm going to lock and underhook. I'm going to put my hand on the floor and sweep everything through. As a result, we can sit down into a position like so. You have excellent control of the man in this position. From here, I want a strong back heel action. He will want his elbow going away from me to defend himself. I want the exact opposite. I want everything going this way. So we punch and lock. I seize my training partner at the elbow. From this position, I put my bottom leg on the floor and I turn somewhat face down. This will greatly tighten and enhance your ability to kick the bottom leg through, so that when you return, you lock a very, very tight triangle. Guys, you cannot cross your feet here. This is not good enough. You must come up off the floor and kick the bottom leg through. This leg kicks through so that when I return, I can lock the full figure of four right into my knee. Then I come back and lock his hands onto his stomach. As Placido tries to defend himself, I just back heel my legs and we strangle very, very rapidly. The strangle here is intensely strong. Even if Placido separates his hands and tries to pull his elbow away from me, you're going to find the strangle comes on immediately. Okay? It's an immensely strong strangle when it's done well. Now, a word to the wise fellas. When you first start doing Yoko Sankaku, it can be a little frustrating, not going to lie to you. You feel like, yeah, it is a triangle, but it's not as strong as a regular front triangle. Done poorly, you're absolutely right. It's not as strong as a front triangle, and it's not as intuitive as a front triangle. But if you learn one simple trick that I'm about to show you now, it can be every bit as strong as your best front triangle. It just requires one simple shift of your body. Let's have a look at that right now. Okay.
Dorsal?
Yeah. So, from a situation where my training partner is locked up and we've gotten through into our standard lock, and we've done a good job of bringing our knee over the top of his armpit. From here, we bring our hand through. Look how I turn and pivot so that I can bring my knee up into his armpit. Don't be afraid to use a little hand assist. He's going to be trying to hide his arm from you. Don't be afraid to pull up on that arm. Okay? And get your legs in a better position. Once we get up into here, look how I just turn my knee through. I want move your head backwards, Placido. I don't want his knee going backwards. So I use the strength of my legs to bring it forwards. You're going to get an initial lock. Just like so. Use that to get to the figure of four on your training partner. Use that to control his elbow here. Now, the real trick, the trick that you're looking for, is going to take this from a decent strangle to a great strangle. Have the confidence to open your feet. Again, don't try to manipulate him with your legs locked. You can't move. Have the confidence holding here or here to open up your feet. Put your bottom leg on the floor and turn belly down. By going belly down, my right leg penetrates much further and my left leg gets all the way underneath his head like a pillow. So that now when I relock my legs, it goes right into place with a full figure four. None of this nonsense here with crossed ankles. It's not going to strangle anybody. Don't try to adjust to here. Plus, you move your arm away from me. If I try to adjust from crossed ankles, I'll never do it. It's never going to happen. That's why so many people get frustrated by this strangle. Hold, go belly down. He tries to pull his elbow away from me, and it doesn't matter. You get that good lock right in there. Lock up the figure of four. Now, Placido, do everything you can to pull your elbow away from me, deny the strangle, kick, scream, do whatever you can. And it's done. Okay? It's just an ungodly tight strangle when it's done properly in that fashion. Okay? I know there's a lot going on there, so we'll just do one more time, going all the way through from the start. Placido's overjoyed to hear this. So, from here, turning around a little bit, buddy. We've managed from here to sneak our hand through. We've done a good job of capturing that underhook. We've done a good job of getting our ear down and trapping. Now, from here, we punch and pivot through and end up in that good attacking position so that I can get underneath his armpit. From here, we lock up the beginnings of a figure four or even just an underhook like so. And we go down towards the mat. From this position, we lock up. I seize my training partner's far elbow, far wrist, whatever it takes. Now the key. I put my foot on the mat and I turn and I pivot up, pressuring my hips down towards his chest. And as a result, I get a much better lock with my legs. So that as poor Placido tries to work his way out of here, it's done. Okay? One more time, Placido. We'll just take it from the dorsal position. We'll go this way. Move to the camera. Okay, we've locked up. We've got our knee in place. Turning around. First thing, I go over the top of his arm and lock. First thing from here is when I go, make a resistant arm, like your hands are locked, trying to stop me. From here, once I separate his hands, look how I pivot and I beat his bottom arm. And as a result, I can come back and get there. I pull up, back heel, and we've got a hold of his head and his arm together. Now, from this position, I need an initial movement down to the mat. So my knee goes right behind his head, and we sit down to the floor. From the floor, we lock up the figure of four and capture that far elbow, far wrist, whatever it takes. Now, I pivot and I go belly down so that my leg gets in so much of a better position that when the figure of four is locked, now his strongest defense does everything he can. Go to escape velocity. And as soon as we strangle, it's done. Okay? This will create a Yoko Sankaku that is truly intimidating for your opponents. Now, as great as that Yoko Sankaku is, you could see that it was based around the idea of me getting good leg position through that belly down turn. I'm sure many of you are looking at this now, you're saying to yourself, well, that's cool, that's a good detail, it's going to help. But dude, I'm 5'3". Some of my training partners are this broad through the shoulders. You seriously think I'm going to be able to lock up that, given my height, short, thick legs? The answer is no, I don't. The good news is you don't have to, because Yoko Sankaku is not only a devastating strangle position, It's also a devastating Kimura position. Let's have a look at that right now. Okay. Plus that will feel right here, buddy.
Bottom side or dorsal?
Bottom side. Okay. So,
Sorry.
so here we are, like so. He's got his hands locked in defensively. From this position, we've got a little bit of exposure, and we step in over the top. From here, we separate. We do what we always do: turn, pivot. There's the beginnings of the Yoko Sankaku position, with his arm and head trapped between my legs. As a result, we can pull up and get our first control. Now, from here, we lock. You've got initial control over the fellow. Obviously, guys, there's an obvious Kimura just right from here, but that is so similar to what we saw earlier in the video, it's not worth reteaching it to you. Now we're interested in coming down, locking, but when we get down to the mat, we're disappointed to find out he's very broad in the shoulders. Maybe you're a little short in the legs, or even worse, you can't get the elbow in. You're like, dude, I can't pull. Strongly resisting posture. I can't turn, I'm trying to turn belly down, nothing's working. And you're like, it's gone, okay? Whenever you see this kind of thing going on, have faith. Lock your Kimura, just like so, and use that back heel to your advantage just to push forward and use your legs, not to strangle him, but just to separate his hands. Now, force the hand down to the mat and put it behind his back. Put one hand on the mat and build for height. And as a result, you find yourself now in the perfect position to attack. Okay? Now, a lot going on there that you couldn't see because of the poor angle that I just chose. Same situation. We're in here. We lock up. For whatever reason, when I go into the initial Yoko Sankaku, I'm thinking, hey, I can do this. I got it. His shoulders aren't that broad. My legs aren't that short. I can do this. But when it's time to go down to the mat, you find you were wrong. Your calculations are wrong. Maybe because he's pulling the elbow away from you or what have you. And when you try to pull the elbow in, it's just not there. When you see this kind of thing going on, use your legs to separate his hands. Put his hand down on the floor. Don't let him put the hand between his legs. If that should happen, tight, strong, use your hands to peel it out. Get the hand down and start building up to the height. Just like so. Now, you're in that perfect position to relock your Kimura. Okay? Again, both head and arm are trapped, and you're in the perfect position now to finish. Okay? So that's your first aspect. If the Yoko Sankaku completely failed, you've got a good Kimura there. Okay? Now, there's going to come times, guys, where the Yoko Sankaku doesn't completely fail. You do get the leg position, but you just can't strangle him. Your legs are long enough, you'd lock the figure of four, but for whatever reason, he's just not strangling. Don't worry. Kimura comes to the rescue yet again. Okay, we're working out of this position. We'll switch. So, walk up, ready? We're working. We put our knee over the top, and from here, we go through and we get that initial grip. When we come down into Yoko Sankaku territory, he locks up his hands. You're trying to pull the arm through. You do the turning belly down. And for whatever reason, I don't know what the reason is, but for whatever reason, you just can't strangle him. You're squeezing with your legs. You're like, it's just not there. Whenever you see this, just take his hands and pressure them apart. That's pretty easy to do. Okay? You can do it by pushing down on this hand. You can do it by pulling across on this elbow. Okay, your choice. They'll both do it. So you can either push the near hand down, or you can pull the far hand across. But for whatever reason, this guy's just not freaking strangling. Whenever you see this, just catch this wrist and just push it to his belly button. And like so. If you need a stronger lock, switch hands and hold this elbow and get a corkscrew effect where it becomes much stronger. So your first option from here, lock the Sankaku, try to strangle. He defends himself. A lot of times, strangle's enough. But if you feel you're squeezing it for whatever reason, it's just not there. Maybe your foot's in your calf muscle instead of the knee. Maybe he's pulling his elbow apart, what have you. Separate the hands. And then from here, catch his hand. First method, one-handed.
Tap.
When you go one-handed, there's a lot of play in the arm. You can take the play out of the arm by holding two-handed.
Tap.
And it's done. If he goes to defend himself from this position, and you feel like, man, it's hard to work in this position, then go back to the near arm and lock. So instead of doing Kimura on this arm, I'm going to do it on the near arm. So I just separate everything, unlock my legs, and come up in the opposite direction. And as a result, we get a nice finish. If that should prove insufficient for whatever reason, once we've separated our training partner's hands, come up above the elbow and hug his wrist. And then from here, push everything through, and we've got a very nasty wrist lock off the floor. Okay? So if he locks up, we put his elbow on the mat. There's his elbow, strong. No matter how strong he makes that elbow, you can always touch his elbow down towards the mat and lock up. Now from here, once we separate our training partner's hands, look how I just slap his wrist right over the top. And as a result, his elbow is now wedged on the floor. When he tries to escape, it's done. Okay? So, if the Yoko Sankaku should fail, you've got Kimura on the far arm, either one-handed push or corkscrew push. If that should fail, you've got Kimura, the classical hands Kimura, on the near side. If that should fail, you've got wrist lock on the near side. Between all of those, plus the Yoko Sankaku strangle, it's going to be pretty damn hard for your opponent to get away from you. We've been looking at this very devastating control grip out of side control. If we can get to a dorsal pin and trap our opponent's head, or even better, his head and arm between our legs, and create a situation where his arm is exposed, the elbow away from the torso, it's a whole bunch of great submissions you can go into. We've looked at Kimuras, we've looked at Yoko Sankaku, the side triangle. Now let's look at a simple transition into arm bars. I'm sure many of you saw this coming just in virtue of the position that your opponent's body ends up in. So we'll start with Placido down in side control.
On side?
Yes, sir.
And then legs?
Yeah. And then we'll, as always, show our initial transition. Most of the time when we go into this, it's out of an underhook. So once we separate our training partner's arm and draw the man up, we're consistently looking to bring the elbow into our training partner's sternum, and then from here, bring our ear onto our training partner's hip, just like so. It's from situations like this that we can start that action of pinching our training partner's head between our knees and controlling him. Every time he tries to get up and escape, it's just so easy to use that bar across the back of his shoulders to return him back down to the mat. At some point, we want to start making the transition to the figure of four and locking in. Now, as your opponent locks his hands tighter and tighter, coming in like so, it can become harder and harder to go into Kimuras, to go into various forms of Yoko Sankaku. There's not much space for me to step into here. If he's vulnerable out here, it's a lot of space for me to start stepping into. But as he closes that space, it becomes harder and harder for me to work here. Okay? And now there's not a lot of space for me to dominate my training partner's arms here. Under those circumstances, it might well be advisable for me to put my knee up behind my training partner and start to make transitions into Juji Gatame. Once I put my knee up behind my training partner like so, I want to be hunched over his arm, strong body posture. And then from this position, my second leg comes up and we're in that low squat over our training partner's body so that we sit down with our head up. What we don't want, fellas, is this. Kind of a loose falling back. You fall back like this, okay? You want to be over his body. So my head will stay over that trapped elbow. As we lock up, everything's over this elbow, just like so. So that as we make that turn, is that low squat, we just sit, and from here we go down with control. That enables us to draw him up, and then from this position, bring our second leg across. Don't be satisfied with this basic Juji Gatame position, the so-called quarter Juji Gatame. This is a good way to finish white belts, but it's not going to cut it at black belt competition level. Okay. From here, we want to make sure we bring the second leg over. I can't be naive and have him catch my foot between his legs. So from these situations, a lot of times we have to pommel up and bring the foot either here. That's one good option, or bring my foot up into here. That's another good option. Okay. I'll show this option here first. So he's got his legs up defensively. I can't just be naive and give him my foot. So I'm going to transition my left foot across. It's got to come up and find the armpit. And we lock up like so. First option from here is to draw the elbow inwards. He locks up tight, tight, tight. And we're constantly looking to pull that arm in and then lock over his far arm. He's presumably locked up tight at this point. Locked up tight.
Okay.
From here, we get a hold of our training partner's knuckles and we start to separate them. Okay. I can't just pull on his arm. I'll never separate him like this because his hands are connected to the far elbow. Okay. Even if I pull the far elbow, that's not going to help. I've got to create separation. I'm not allowed to grab any 1, 2, or 3 digits, but I am allowed to grab all 4 at the same time. Now from here, I separate and I get my wrist between his wrist and his hand. So when he goes to lock the same grip, my wrist is interceding in between them. And as a result, I can begin to separate my training partner's arms. Once we go in here, I want to cover his hand. If I cover the wrist, he can relock his hands. So once we get that coverage, I always want to cover my training partner's hands. Now, I put it in behind me. From this position, he goes to twist out, move out, etc. And from here, it goes right across your hip and into a devastating break. Okay? So, starting now from this devastating position here. He's so locked in with his arms that there's no space for me to go in. I've just got his head now. From this position, we lock up. I put my chin right over his elbow. I put my second leg up and I hunch over him like a malevolent looking hobbit, just locked in like so. Now from this position, look, I'll just lift my second knee off the mat. Just enough to be able to make that turn and go into a quick sit. What we don't want is to do this kind of business and stand up. Now he easily turns into me and I lose the whole position. It's a disaster. So we make sure that once we come up like so, I turn to face his legs and my chest is behind his elbow at all times. This makes for a simple movement into a good attacking position. Now I grab my own thigh. So I have a hand behind me. If he turns into me, I've got good base behind me. I turn my knees. His legs are up defensively. I don't just foolishly give him a foot. Rather, from here, I bring my knee up, pass it through. I seize the far arm. I lock right over where the rear deltoid meets the tricep, and I lock my feet. I keep everything up over the top. I separate his hands just long enough that from here I can get my wrist between. He goes to relock his hands. It makes no sense, Basura, go lock the same way you just did. And from here, I go in to separate. I get a hold of his hands, I lock up. As I straighten the arms out, I see you've got good pressure here, but not enough. So we sit up and tuck it in behind. I grab my own thigh. Because my feet are locked, he tries desperately to slice his elbow to the mat. Can't do it. He goes to turn out, locked feet, can't do it. And then from here, you've got a very, very tough break. Okay? Alternatively, from this position, instead of putting my foot here and going with locked feet, we're going to take our foot and pass it through inside our training partner's feet and lock up like so. So we go to a 3/4 Juji. Now from here, we use the same grip break. Lock up on our training partner. He goes to rotate out. I bring my feet in. And from here, as he goes to turn out, I hit a pull with this hand and a push with this one. As Placido goes into the turn, I go into my right hip. Even if he got all the way up to his knees now, it would mean nothing. Then we get a pushing finish where I push the wrist across and I push his left elbow into my left hip. And as a result, we get very strong breaks. So, once again, yeah. Here's our start position. We're locked up. Instead of bringing my foot under the armpit, I'm going to bring my foot in front of the deltoid, just like so. I'm going to cross my ankles and lock in a good tight 3/4 Juji. I'm going to go forward and find my training partner's wrist. As he goes in to defend himself, it's so tough. Now, we straighten the arm out. We get 2 hands on. As he goes to turn out and escape, my left hand is pulling, my right hand starts pushing,
Tap.
and we get that break. Okay? All from the start now.
Bottom side.
Yes, sir. So we've got an underhook. We've penetrated the elbow with the underhook. We come up, my knee captures his head. My second knee completes the capture so that his head is caught between my knees. From here, I go through and lock up the figure of 4, but I just can't get any kind of separation. I'm worried about stepping over for a legs Kimura. Maybe there's something that's intimidating me from doing that. I can't get in for Yoko Sankaku. There's no space behind the elbow. So instead, I'm going to put everything over my training partner's elbow, my chin close to the elbow, never standing up like an idiot, like so, okay? Always making sure my knee is behind him as a tight wedge, just like so. And then from here, as my second knee comes up, I just make that hunching motion forward, which makes it possible for me to sit with good control over my training partner. Hand goes to the mat, I corkscrew my legs like so. He tries to turn into me. There's good control here, okay? We don't try to finish in this beginner position, rather we feed the leg across. First choice is feed to the armpit. If we're going to feed to the armpit, we want to control the far arm, and then from here, lock up over the top of it. We seize our training partner, we stretch him out. As he goes to fight his way out of here, we tuck it in behind our arm. And then from here, we've got a very, very strong break indeed. Alternatively, he locks up stronger than that. Locks up like so. From here, I feed my foot to the inside. And from here, we separate our training partner's arm. As we bring it out, he goes in to defend himself. My left hand pulls, right hand pushes, and we get that very strong finishing position. In this way, you can get devastating transitions into Juji Gatame that really work at the high levels. We're looking at this attempt to go from the basic side control, go through this intermediary control grip, the dorsal pin, which involves using our legs to pin our opponent's head, possibly an arm, and create an exposed elbow. And from there, we can go into a host of very controlled submission holds. We've looked at the idea of going into Kimura. We've looked at Yoko Sankaku, the side triangle. We've looked at Juji Gatame. Now let's look at one which I'm sure many of you saw as a possibility right from the start, and that's back exposure into rear strangles. Anytime you pull your opponent up, his entire back is exposed on the far side. And so, and I'm sure many of you observed this, oh man, there's a lot of back exposure there. How can we use that most efficiently? Let's have a look at it right now. Okay, again, we start off
Bottom side.
yes. Bottom side control. First thing we want to do is establish some kind of mechanism of getting to the underhook. We've been looking at one which is particularly effective, the 10-finger method, where I feed my hand through on my training partner, lock up a 10-finger grip, and then lever his forearm and wrist out of position. Then lower my head so that when he tries to re-pommel back in, there's no space for him to do so. As a result, we always get to that underhook. Once we get to the underhook, we transfer our head to the other side. We bring our elbow into our training partner's sternum and we pin his elbow down towards his hip. We start this action of tripoding and then we use our knee to capture our training partner's head. I sweep his knee out of position, and then from here, we capture our training partner's head between our knees. If he ever tries to get up to his base, you have a bar across his shoulders that will always put him down to hip no matter how strong he is. Under these circumstances, we go through and we lock what appears to be the perfect Kimura lock, just like so. Oftentimes he will finish with Kimura, but there's going to be those days you feel the guy just pulls his arms down defensively and Kimura just feels impossible. He starts turning his chest down to the mat and you're feeling like, dude, there's no way I'm going to get Kimura, no way I'm going to get Yoko Sankaku. But the more he turns into you, the more back exposure we get. So now we're going to post our hand down on the floor and we're going to pivot around behind our training partner. And most importantly, I'm going to get behind his tricep. So that when Placido goes to turn back into me, it's hard because of his own tricep. Okay? Once we get to a position like this, our whole thing is to control and lock his arm. As he tries desperately to turn back in, his own arm prevents him. Now, I drop and get below his shoulders. And then I just connect my hip to his. From situations like this, so many ways for us to go. I can knee drop and operate from here, standing over him. I can step my foot directly from where I am, straight through and over the top we go. That's option number one. Then from here, we just fall, pull, and lock. Coming back is an obvious option number two. I'm sure many of you saw this coming. We don't step over, rather we sit down. And from the seated head and arm position, it's an easy thing to pass the foot through and lock up the figure of four. So once again, from a situation where I start off like so, I stuff my training partner's head and trap it with my knee. From here, we trap the head in place. I put the bar across my training partner's trapezius and rhomboids as he tries to come up. You're covering his scapula, and very easy for us now to return him to the mat. We come up, we lock through on our training partner and get to the figure of four, but for whatever reason, we're not able to get any of those conventional finishes. So from here, we see a lot of back exposure here. We take our elbow in close and turn on our training partner. So there's a lot of weight behind him. From these kinds of situations, look how we get down low. We get a hold of our training partner's arm with a classic figure four with the head involved. When he goes to turn back into me, it's a difficult thing when we connect hip to hip. Now from here, first option is to step into this space. So I come up, and from here I lean my head forward and I come up almost like a dog pissing on a tree. Then I just step my foot right into that space. Okay? So I lean forward to make my leg lighter, and then I just step right into the space. Now I just sit, pull the man through, and find myself with a perfect finish. If you don't like the idea of coming up in what could be an off balance or awkward looking position, then just knee slide and sit. Because you're sitting, your legs are now unweighted. And as a result, even if his legs are up tight, it's very easy to pass your foot through. Then we just turn and find ourselves once again right behind our training partner and ready to strangle. So this is an excellent way for us to convert this great attacking position into back strangles.